No worries. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I think we've got people trickling in, but we have a lot to talk about and not that much time. So I'll kick it off. For those that I don't know, my name is Keith Weightman. I'm an RVP with Bullhorn, which is a technology provider to the staffing industry. I've been in sales for 15 plus years, both as an individual contributor as well as leadership. And I spent time selling in the staffing industry as well. Super excited to be here today with the panelists that have so graciously joined me. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But just to set the topic for today, we're going to be talking about processes that we feel are absolutely critical to ensure that you are putting in place to make sure that you're building your sales org, that if you don't and you're not paying attention to, can have a huge impact on your sales momentum. And what we're going to talk about is universal across every industry, whether you're in staffing, you're tech, you should be able to pick something out of it. And hopefully you have some actionable ideas that you'll take out of it. So we'll spend the first 30, 35 minutes picking apart these topics. Then we'll use 10 or so minutes at the end to answer any questions that are in the chat. So without any further ado, let me go to the person that joined last, Hamish, to go ahead and introduce himself. If you could do your background, your location, and maybe how people can connect with you after the fact if they've got questions after we jump off.
Yeah, thanks for calling me out there. Just for the people who just actually joined late as well, I was correct, but I appreciate the support as always, Keith. My name is Hamish Stephenson. I am the founder and CEO of a business called Seller.io. We're right at the intersection between sales training and sales recruitment. We help, our main ideal customer profile are recruitment firms and SaaS companies that sell to recruitment firms. So I come from a huge background in recruitment myself. Before I became the country head for an HR tech SaaS company in New York. I am in New York. I've been here about 5 years, but the silly accent is Australian. And the best way to contact me is Hamish at Seller, SELR.io, or just find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. All right, Will, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Keith. And it's awesome to be here. I'm excited to share with you guys some of the lesson learned over the years. My name's Will Hayes. I'm our COO at IDR. We're a tech and healthcare staffing firm, and I'm based out of Dallas. Honestly, staffing's all I know. I was recruited in 2007. I'm from the University of Tennessee at a career fair. That's all I've ever done is work for IDR and do staffing. So I've played multiple roles: recruiting, selling, starting branches, running payroll, dealing with candidates, consultants, everything in between. And as we've grown, we're about $150 million in sales. I oversee our sales and recruiting functions on the technology side, and also all of the revenue generating operations as well. So I'm excited to be here. The best way to reach me, I'll drop my LinkedIn into the chat. I'm pretty responsive through there, so that would probably be best.
Awesome. Last but not least,
I guess that's me. I'm honored to be here. My name's Casey Jacox, and it's great to spend time with you all today. I spent 20 years in the staffing and consulting industry. I also played former college quarterback. I got to give love to Uncle Rico. If people don't know Uncle Rico, make sure you Google him. But the sport of football taught me a lot about life. But as I mentioned, so I spent 20 years at Kforce as a seller and an executive leadership person to help grow large teams. And now I'm an author of the book, Win the Relationship, Not the Deal. I run a podcast for dads called the Quarterback Dadcast, and I'm a sales and leadership coach. And it's what's most fun is I get to share years of experience, not always success, but failure, to help others hopefully not have the same mistakes. And I'm excited to have a good conversation with my team today and hopefully inspire you all to do things a little bit differently in 2023.
Yeah. And I will give a quick plug. I just finished reading Casey's book. I really enjoyed it. If you're in sales, really, it's just a book about life in general. If you follow these rules, I would definitely go check it out. Go to his website. He'll hook you up, get a link out there. So, all right, let's get started. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is one of the processes I think that is probably the most critical. It's also one of the most challenging, one that I've made tons of mistakes on. And it's the hardest thing that I think a sales leader can get right. And it's a continuous process. And that is the hiring process. It's really hard to find, attract, hire good salespeople. It's even more difficult to hire great salespeople, right? And we've all had experiences where we made mistakes, and hopefully we can impart some wisdom on the first process, which is hiring. So I'm going to go to Casey with the first question. For those in the audience, what are some of the things that you would look for, or that you look for when you're hiring salespeople? What are the things to look out for, and why? Because you need a lot of experience in this. So be helpful to hear that.
I love this question. And I love this question because I think sometimes the answers, a lot of companies I work with, they think of like the science-based part of the sales job, which I think I love focusing on the art. I love focusing on like, how curious is somebody? What kind of questions do they ask? Because it's easy to memorize a 45-page deck, run through a meeting and say, man, I crushed that meeting. I killed it. Told them everything about us. We're the best. Yet the person you're speaking to blacked out after 30 minutes and forgot your name, forgot your company. And they smiled a couple of times, but me as a seller think, oh, that's the best meeting ever. Wrong. So I think I would encourage leaders, find ways to learn about their curiosity. I would also encourage you to find ways that they have been through some adversity or some hardship in their life. I want to know about the resilience. And when I was hiring people, I used to always try to convince them this is not the perfect job for them, to see how they respond. I want to because it's easy in sales. We think when you first get into it, you're like, oh, sweet, I'm going to sell, I'm going to make a ton of money. It's going to be easy. It's going to be awesome. All these customers are going to call me. And that's wrong. That does not happen. Right. And so how can you find grittiness in people? You know, I think about myself. I went through a pretty significant injury when I was in high school. That totally changed who I was and taught me so many life skills around humility, vulnerability, grit, resilience, things I've talked about today. So, and the last thing I would share is one of my favorite pieces of advice I've gotten in my life is someone said, Casey, do you want to be right or do you want to get what you want? And I said, well, I want both. And they said, you can't, you got to pick one. And for me, I was like, well, I want to get what I want. And that's the answer we ideally want, because if someone's always trying to be right, that usually means there's some ego issues. And I think for any good seller, if he or she can check their ego at the door, they can focus on being a great teammate, a great customer, someone who sets expectations. That's probably the best way I'd answer it, Keith.
Yeah, that's great. And what I would do is go ahead and put that question in the chat, because that's a good little nugget takeaway for people that if they're not asking a question like that, they should. Hamish or Will, anything that you would add to what Casey, or elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, Will, do you want to go first?
You're good. Go ahead, jump in.
Okay, awesome. I like to find out quickly whether or not they're actually a specialist in the area that they say they're a specialist in. Because a lot of people apply to different roles. They apply to recruitment roles. They apply to SaaS roles, and then kind of revamp their resume to each role. And then it's really easy, like Casey just said, it's really easy to memorize a whole deck and then just speak about it for 45 minutes. But as a sales leader, you have to learn to really dig into different aspects and then see if people are actually a specialist in those areas. Like, it's really easy to lie on a resume, but it's really hard to lie about like the intricacies of cybersecurity for a special like SOX control, and then really dig into those separate areas where people just go, okay, well, now I'm kind of like, they're like sweating a bit and they're like, actually, no, I didn't actually do that. I fudged that on the CV. And it brings back to, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, but it's, in short, it's named after people that have a false sense of confidence after learning about a really small part of field or topic for a short period of time. And then they become these like crazy confident about that one thing that they watched a 30-minute conspiracy YouTube on. But often then when you get an expert in that space really digging into it, they kind of crumble a bit. So I think what I look for in candidates when I'm hiring sales candidates is really digging into like the minutia of their background and why they think that they're a specialist in that really, really specialist area that they say they're in. And if I think that they can actually do that and they can really, really become a specialist in that space, then I have a lot of confidence that they'll be able to become a specialist in 6 to 12 months in the space that we're employing them for. Because if they can then do that, then they're going to be able to uncover like crazy problems in the discovery phase. They're going to be able to sit in front of their top 100 ICP clients and go, I know I can preempt the problem you're about to tell me, and then I can solve it this way. And if they can do that in any way, in any part of their background, in any part of their resume, then I think, do you know what? That's a really, really great attribute to have as a salesperson.
Yeah, for sure. And Will, I'm gonna pose a different question just because, on the same topic, like, what are some of the most common mistakes that people make when they're hiring salespeople, and maybe some tips on how to avoid them? I think would be super helpful for the audience.
Yeah, no, and all those are great points. I mean, staffing, it's a little bit more complex in Hamish's world, right? Where staffing's a pretty simple business. You bill more than you pay. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So, we're not getting into advanced, at least on the staffing side, technical interviews and screening interviews. So I'm more focused on kind of what Casey said, a little bit more on some of those soft skills, and then I can mold and develop the specializations that we need. I know for myself, when looking at that, one of my first mentors also said something similar to me that Casey's mentor told him, and he worded it a little bit different. And he said, you could either be rich or you can be right, but you can't be both in a sales profession. And I've done sales since I was 16 years old, banging on doors, doing door-to-door type stuff. And there's just a lot of truth into that statement. So I can relate a lot to what Casey said there. In terms of like mistakes, I also agree with Casey. There is an art form that exists in the interview. For me, that art form has been to get to a point with my candidates that I can get them to having a conversation, right? Kind of breaking through that initial awkwardness of an interview. And I have lots of different ways to do that, how they interact with the first person they interview with, the first couple of minutes with me, really understanding their story and what they're bringing into the interview, not necessarily from an experience at the workplace, but also life experience. I like to get to know some of those things about a person so that I kind of have some sort of context in terms of the answers that they're going to be giving me. But then I quickly like to shift to somewhat of a science-based approach. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people make the mistake of going through an entire interview and really looking for people that they like. And if you've paid a lot of attention to personality assessments, or if you use anything like that, it is more common, especially with junior managers, to relate to people that they have something in common with. And so you're ignoring a big population of different skills. And so I always encourage, especially new managers, right? Learn the art form, but really make sure you're being consistent with your process, especially the more people you have involved in it. It's one thing to go in one-on-one as a decision maker, but as your company grows and scales, there could be 5, 6, 7 people involved in a certain process, depending on how that goes, whether it's HR, a senior manager, a director, C-level, just depending on how you do your hiring. So really being on the same page in terms of the opener questions, as I call them, then you kind of elaborate and go into depth from those. But 3 or 4 really good opening questions that you can consistently ask every candidate, that you can kind of gauge those responses and see how do you really rank as it relates to other people. So I think that's one mistake, is some people move a little bit more to gut too soon in the interview process, instead of kind of relying on their process to do that. And then to kind of go back a little bit to what Hamish said, really going over the expectations of the role. I've been in positions, there's all kinds of different variations of sales, right? You've got account maintenance, you've got business development, lots of cold calling versus relationship building. Really making sure you go through the expectations you have of that person. I've been in a situation where I've sat down with the sales rep that just got promoted or hired on day one, and and they want to know what accounts they're given. And I'm like, well, we need you to go get the accounts. We don't have any accounts we're passing over to you. And they may need to work on that skill set. So expectations as well in the interview process, I think, is something that needs to be covered as well.
Yeah, I think you put a really big point that goes throughout sales in general is a consistent process, not just in your sales methodology, but in your hiring, whether it's with you, whether it's with your managers. And as you said, as you grow and scale, if there's not a consistent process, that's when crap gets off the rails and it can really stall your momentum. So we could spend hours talking about hiring. We've got 2 more topics that we've got to cover, and we're falling behind, but let's go on to the next one. The other thing I'll call out just before we move, I make the mistake of like, man, I really like this person. I'm going to hire them, which is such a sales guy thing to do. It's like, oh, I really like them. I want to bring them on, and not taking that full thing. So I just wanted to call that out. Okay, the second thing, you hire someone, you're ready to get started. The traditional is, here's your territory, or hey, sit in 2 to 3 day training and then go practice on your clients, which it's good to have live fire. But one of the things that I think firms get wrong is a training process. And it's vital to make sure that we're setting up the talent for success. We give them the tools, we give them the training to make sure they're successful. So let's talk about training. And I'm going to go to Hamish first, since he's our sales enablement guru. So talk a little bit about, what you see in firms that do a really good job of training. What are some of those characteristics of how they train people and really create that culture of continuous learning amongst their team?
So, and thanks for calling me a sales enablement guru, Keith. It's really sweet. I'll send you the check later. Basically, I speak to hundreds of clients a month about sales training, and all of them, like I've spoken to like Will, for example, in the room about this. And a lot of clients have such a huge amount of internal training and onboarding that it is often something where like the waters somewhere along the way can get muddied, and you do need to still continually invest in your sales force, regardless of what you've actually got internally. And half of my clients have really, really hardcore internal training, but they still go out to an outsourced sales trainer because the feelings that you get from your sales staff, if you're actually investing in their development, is second to none. They have confidence in the company. They believe that you're really like spending the time and energy to actually like spend the money on their development in order for them to make more money. It's also, if you have an outsourced sales trainer, then you're going to be able to have like your staff, your key leaders, your sellers that have been doing it for 20 years, your sellers that have been doing it for 2 years, are going to confide in that person a lot more than say they're going to confide into an internal L&D team, because it's just, there's so much of that, like you said it before, that like the ego involved in sales that a lot of people don't actually want to speak up and see and then say what their faults are. But instead, when you're going behind closed doors and actually talking to a bipartisan stranger about what it is that you're doing, then naturally you're going to give them a lot more information and then work on those developments. So for me, I mean, the amount of like, if you went out to 100 different key leaders in the space, I reckon 80% of them would come back and say that they definitely benefit from extra training. And that's coming from an industry where 50% of all companies don't have any training in place. So I don't know. I'm Zan, the sales trader, but I don't see any real issue in going and spending a little bit more money on your staff.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point around the ego in sales, right? And we often, even internally at Bullhorn, we've got some great sales enablement. We've got an awesome team that puts together really good training. But there's always that, well, when was the last time that they've sold? Or like, I want to go learn from someone else that's in the trenches now, and they often discount that training. So I do think it's important that teams are looking outwardly to supplement and complement what they're doing internally. Because to your point, it's showing your team that you're invested in their success and you want them to be successful to the point where we're going to spend money to bring in people to continue your education. So really good points. Will, Casey, I don't know, anything that you want to add on that one? I
got something real quick. I would just make sure practice is a must. It's not just you do it for the first week. You do it all the time. I don't know about you, but like pilots, they practice often, right? Which makes us feel safe flying with them in planes. Yet we as in sales, we have one good month and all of a sudden we're elite and we wing it.
Yeah.
That's a joke. I mean, that is on us as sales leaders. That's on us to create environments where vulnerability is empowered, where people are encouraged to mess up internally and have fun with it. And man, I didn't know screwed that role play up, but make it fun. Like when you mess up with each other, you show that you have to be perfect. Cause I don't know about you, but all four of us on this panel, we're all flawed. We're all human. We all got gaps. We all got issues. There's areas for us all to improve. Yet sometimes when salespeople start jobs, they're like this, they think they have to be perfect and they're scared to say, I don't know. And so when sales leaders can create that environment, to me, that's, I think, what separates the good, the great from elite. And I would encourage anybody, I'll try to find it while we're looking, there's a great link about the Blue Angels and how they practice. If anybody's seen it, and it's like a 2 or 3 minute video. I use it when I speak often to sales teams, but it shows what the Blue Angels do before they go fly planes. And they're literally flying a plane with their eyes closed in a conference room. So I don't know about you, but as a sales professional, it's craft and it takes practice. And we as sales leaders, that's on you to make sure that is, I guess, put in place for any new hire that starts your company.
I love that.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I was going to say, as an example, like we've been doing this for, decades, right? I'll ask the group, how many times did you practice prior to coming to here? Because I know that I practiced a ton before I came on here. It's just, it becomes part of that culture of like, doesn't matter how many times you do it. It's like, it's the routine, making sure you're doing the routine. So at the end, you play like you practice, right? And if you're not practicing, don't be surprised when you don't get the results that you get, right?
Well, so Keith,
yeah, and I know.
Sorry.
My bad, Hamish. Go ahead. Yeah, you're good. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
So 90% of training is lost within a week of receiving it, and that's why. And again, it's why you have to make sure that like the old school sales training was do 5 days of 6 hour a day training, and then the trainer leaves. And then you've got a 200-page booklet that they expect you to read through and you never touch it again. You take about 4 or 5 different things from that, and then you work on your business development strategy. So, I mean, I think it's so important if you are going to instill training, then it has to be an hour a week. You got to set homework, you got to set takeaways, and then you got to rehash the week before on the next session. And you got to do that for like 10 weeks. And that's why in a lot of recruitment firms, a lot of big ones, and Will, if you guys do this, then I'd love to hear it. But you have that like 3 to 4 month boot camp when you start, and then you practice the candidate calls, you practice your business development calls, and then you talk about it in the next session and go like, what did we screw up, and how can we actually fix that issue? And it's just about retaining as much information, like you said, practicing after.
Yeah. And I think Casey had said something really good. I know when I was talking to him last week, and your salespeople are practicing all the time. It's just most of the time they're practicing on your clients versus in your controlled environment. So they're going to get lots of practice, but just be aware that it may not be the best experience for the customers that they're practicing on. So the more repetitions, the more reps, the more seniority, the more times you go through situational failures inside of a classroom or in a live setting, it's going to help improve and speed up that process. And the reason I think most organizations don't practice is because I think it's a commitment at an organizational level. I mean, sure, if you're a line level manager or you're dealing, you're training your first person or mentoring your first person, everybody can be a leader to some degree. But if you want to really move the needle, the organization has to have a commitment to it. That means that they have to be able to provide content, whether that's internal, external, and they have to have a system or a structure in place, which someone has to design and create. So, however you're breaking up being a player coach, or however you're, creating these roles or opportunities internally, you have to invest in that. And I know for a lot of staffing leaders, that's scary, because a lot of times the best people that are really good at training, not always, are sometimes high revenue producers. So you've got to be willing to say, like, am I going to start scaling this organization through like a multiplication effect and like a multiplier effect, and 10x my sales team through getting this one person to really share a lot of the knowledge, go out on the street and shadow them and give back to the organization? Because that is a big investment, and it's one that I think has to be made at some point.
100% agree. One thing I do want to call out before we move to the next one, because we're coming up on time here and we want to get to some questions, is I think you would all agree that the best salespeople that we have ever worked for or worked with and for, they go out and they're self-learners. They set the tone. They go seek out training, because if your company's not providing it, they're going to go find it, or they're going to go find a company that then provides it, and you're going to lose one of your top producers. And I say that as I look at, I see Matt Dichter here, and he was a rep on my team. He's now a sales leader running an organization. He was like a sales manager's dream, as far as like, I didn't have to tell him to go do training. The dude was on trainings all week, but he would, at the same time, he was also killing it and blowing it out. And there's a direct correlation between working on your craft and the results that you get. So,
hey, Keith, real quick, I know we got to get going, but I would tell leaders to do this. And sometimes sarcasm is a great way to kind of soften the mood a little bit. But imagine if we all role played, and I said, hey, and I'm from Bullhorn, so I'll role play right now. Hey, Keith, it's Casey from Bullhorn. Do you got a minute? And he would say yes. And I'd say, hey, I'm really excited to talk to you. For one, because I'm going to practice on you today. Two, I know I showed up late and parked in the handicap spot, which I didn't know where to park, so I just parked there. I thought it'd be cool. And I'm going to wing it. So I'd love for you to give me all your business and ask for the exclusive, because my manager asked me to ask about that. And I'm not really sure what you guys do. It doesn't really matter, but I want to get all your business. So can you sign up to play and give me an order, please? Obviously, massive sarcasm, right? But sometimes that's how bad we sound, because you don't practice and you wing it.
Yes.
So anyway, this fires me up.
I know. No, I love it. So let's move on to the next one. We're going to spend probably 5 to 7 minutes on the next one, even though it's like, this one's really near and dear to my heart. The last process that we're going to talk about is a sales process. And there are obviously multiple different methodologies, whether it's Sandler, Miller, Hyman, solution selling. We're not going to get into that. We're going to look at one piece of the sales process that's consistent across every methodology. It's really around qualification. I think it's what sets elite sellers from average sellers. They know how to qualify. They walk away from more deals than they actually bring into the pipeline. And it's also something that's often overlooked by new sellers. They want to take on everything. We've got happy years. It's like, oh no, I can solve that. We'll go figure out a creative way. And then it comes to bite them in the end, because you can't really service it if they don't fit within your wheelhouse. So first question is going to be for Casey around deal qualification. How would you suggest the audience think about deal qualification? What are the things that they need to be thinking about? What are the top things you see in sellers that are really good at qualification? And why is it so integral to the overall sales process?
I love this question, and I hope people take this to heart. I learned the impact of sales process at age 41. So I know we're not supposed to talk about age, HR rules. Apologize, candidly. I'm 46. I learned about the power of a sales process. I learned about something called MEDDIC. My friends at Bullhorn, we talk about speed 3D. Deals are won or lost in discovery. I put that in the chat. And so what the power of a sales process, there's the gap. What happens is usually when people don't have a sales process, salespeople get their ego in the way. They're scared for their manager to ask questions because they feel like it's attack on them. But in the end, if you're a great leader empowering people to talk about a sales process and discovery, you're going to, like Keith said, you're going to actually save time by getting deals out that you shouldn't be in there. And as I think about the title of the book I wrote, Win the Relationship, Not the Deal, like I want to win people. right? If I'm trying to force a deal into my pipeline, but it's not the right fit for me, in the end, I'm going to lose that person because I'm going to be, quote unquote, the salesperson, giving them something they don't want, trying to deliver a service they don't need yet, but I'm trying to make my number, so I'm going to do it anyways. That's what all heinous salespeople do, right? And so we can think about using a sales process to make sure there's a roadmap of how we're going to, from a pilot perspective, fly the airplane versus winging it, right? At least now we can say, hey, I can go back to my manager and say, hey, I think we can help this client. Here are the problems that exist, I think, for them. Here's how we could solve those problems. What do you think? At least it's some dialogue internally. But and last thing I'd say, what a sales process taught me, any good deal that's closed, the client's going to sell themselves because we've asked the right questions. We've uncovered the pain or problem. And if you have not done that, if you're pitching the quote unquote perfect candidate in the staffing business, most time sales and account managers or recruiters or sales leaders or recruiting leaders, if you're on this call, we don't know what the perfect candidate looks like because we're not software developers unless you have ability to read code, because I don't, right? And so I think if you're not embracing a sales process, please learn from folks like us who learned it too late in our career. And I wish I could rewind the tape and start back at 23 when I started at Hall Kenyon before Kay first purchased us, and just embrace it because it is gold when you really, really buy into it.
Yeah, you mentioned one thing, and we got a lot of salespeople on this call, so they probably know this, but you mentioned MedPick and Medic and Speed 3D. Can you just share a little bit about what that is for those that may not be familiar with it?
Yep. So like Medic, I learned is, stands for metrics, economic buyer, decision process, decision criteria, identify pain, coach, champion, or competition. And it gives you a framework to follow, or Speed 3 for Bullhorn, but like if it gives you a framework to follow where your gaps, right? And so I like the types of questions I like to ask are really open-ended, TED-based, I call them, tell me, explain, or describe. And so we think about asking questions through that sales process. It helps identify gaps where you think the deal is happening, what you know about the customer, what you don't know about the customer. And then you really have a called a slide edge moment. We either choose that, man, this is awesome. Speed, Medic helped me identify a gap that I didn't know about. Great. I'm going to go call the customer and figure it out. Or you choose the other one, which is the blind eye. Like, no, I'm good. I'm elite. I'm perfect. I got it all figured out. Boss is going to close, which is a hope strategy. Right. And that seems reckless, seems risky. And again, when we just are open and honest and follow that process, use the tools that are right there and then throw in some practice to it, you will separate yourself. You will be better than most. You'll be on the path to being elite. And it just is a lot more easy way to measure success than the whole wing it, cross my fingers approach.
Yeah. And you mentioned a good point there around framework. And we talked about it on the hiring process. Like, how do we keep a consistent framework process that our new hires can follow? So we're all speaking the same language, right? The way that everybody looks at the deal is the same. So you can have an honest look at, is this a real deal? Is this not? I'm going to call on Matt again because he's on here. I'm like the biggest skeptic when we get to a deal. I'm always asking questions. He's always like, I got this, man. He called it the Matty D guarantee. And he usually came through.
That's a t-shirt.
Yeah, I want one.
A Matty D guarantee. Yeah. Where's your tattoo that says that?
Yeah. Are you going to supply those at the next Bullhorn Engage?
I think we're going to have to. Well, so we've got a little over 5 minutes. So what I want to do is, and again, we could talk on this for hours. And if you have questions after that we don't get to, please reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're happy to connect and talk shop. But let's go through any questions from the audience that we can address. I saw a couple come through. I'm going to go to this one, and I'm going to point this to Will. What do you say to new hires who claim that they have a hard time practicing in a controlled environment, and they insist that they prefer to learn by doing their sales activities in real life? What would you tell a rep that came to you that's on the IDR team?
Yeah, I think, we talked a lot about people that are, very curious by nature, right? I think that's a kind of an undervalued skill set that, you really need to support, especially in the staff that you have. But I think that's what I would try to explain is like, listen, this stuff changes. Like, I mean, yes, you have like, there are consistent fundamentals, but technologies are always changing. Processes are always having to evolve. We've got automations now. We've got all kinds of different things. And although I think that's wonderful, you know, you can still get a lot of really good training by shadowing, watching, and giving feedback after meetings. I think that's a wonderful way to help people. But I think you're going to have to sit down and explain that, like, this is part of the organization strategy, is to practice and get better over and over and over again. The other thing I would potentially try there is I would maybe turn that person into an instructor or into a trainer, because I think too, as people start to progress in their careers, they lose sight of fundamentals. And sometimes a certain salesperson, maybe they're carrying a book of business that, you know, has kind of evolved beyond the core templates of the business, right? They've had to customize it on to meet the needs of a specific customer or whatever it is. But keeping their fundamentals sharp is also important, because we know that customer may disappear. They may be changing job descriptions here in the next week at any given time. So really turning it back on them and maybe having them contribute some of the training on fundamentals in a classroom setting and things like that will also sharpen their skills, because I know if it's the right person, they're going to prepare for that just like they would their meetings and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's a topic I think we could all go on for a while, as someone that doesn't think that it's necessary to do the dry firing and do it in real life. But just to get to some other questions, there was a question earlier on, do you utilize a scorecard for consistency for the candidate interviews when you've got multiple people interviewing? Do you have a scorecard, or how do you manage that consistency across a group?
I know we do. We use a scorecard. So, and we keep it very simple. We kind of have three. We have like a primary, secondary, and tertiary skill set we're looking for. And we try to simplify and dumb that down as in terms of could be a low fit, medium fit, high fit, something very simple, but something that gets the team talking the same language is something that I've used for years. And I think is a mistake if you're not using something, especially if there's a selection through committee of some sort, or you're looking for feedback from multiple voices of a team. You have to have a consistent way to grade and rank those candidates.
Yeah, and not to give away your secret sauce, but maybe if they need a template, be nice enough to share it with them if they reach out to you.
I'll share one.
Yeah,
I'm cool with it.
Okay, awesome. All right, this question, I'm going to ask this to Casey, because this is a good one. What are some strategies to help set team egos aside?
You as a leader go first. I think sometimes leaders will say, hey, this is an ego-free environment, but they don't show their own vulnerabilities. They don't share where they sucked. They don't share where they used to mess up. They don't show where they got fired by a client. They don't share where they struggled in their first 2 months of the job. Watch what happens when you do that. When you do that and you go first in the role play or the practice, and you aren't perfect in front of them, everybody else will start to follow. So I found that by doing that, it dramatically changes. It helps remove ego. And sometimes I think asking more questions is a good way to help remove ego, versus if there is ego in the room and we start talking at people or telling people how to change or how to do it, they're going to get defensive and you're just going to create friction. But when we as leaders can go first, and like sometimes when I coach people, I'll say, hey, first I'll say, do you believe what you do matters? And hopefully they say yes, which is why the sign's behind me. And then I'll say, tell me the last time you failed. And they kind of look, why you asked that? I said, I failed today. I messed up. Have you ever, when's the last time you failed? You failed last week? I failed last week. And I think just being real about it is, I've found, I'm not saying I'm right, but I've just found in my years of experience, that is a great way to remove it and encourage people to practice and get comfortable ditching that ego. Yeah,
I love that. We've got time for one more question. I'm going to get this one from Brent, and I'm going to ask it to Hamish. So do you see a change post-COVID in sales strategy becoming more internal or inside sales versus outside sales? I've always been more of a face-to-face person. And if so, do you know of any tools other than email and LinkedIn? Because I feel it's harder, and I agree with this, it's harder for a client to necessarily say no to your face. It's always good to get belly to belly or get in front of someone. what are some, what's your perspective on the question, and then any tools that you would recommend? I know you're a big fan of sales enablement tools, and you know a lot of them. So it'd be a good question for you.
So, I mean, there's three parts to the answer, and I'll keep it quick. So firstly, yes, it's 100% changed inside outside sales since COVID. The way that you sell now, because there's been such a small gap between the COVID recession and the incoming one, I think a lot of those techniques have kind of continued since. So you have to be way more sensitive in your selling now than you say you were doing in like 2019. You got to learn to sell in a recession. And I think that's a skill that you'll have for decades to come. And once you do that, your life will change when it comes to selling. Secondly, I used to spend $400 a week on cab fares. Kind of like that was in Sydney, Australia, and I moved to New York, and now I catch the subway more, which is brilliant. But I am such a firm believer in, if you're living in a city like New York and you're not doing in-person meetings, then there is no reason for you to live in New York. Like there is absolutely no reason. Like you might as well be living just like in Iceland and doing business in New York. It doesn't matter. So yeah, I'm a strong believer in in-person meetings. I think 10 Zoom meetings equal the same as one in-person meeting. Just the amount that you can actually get from someone over an hour coffee chat is just infinite compared to everything else. If you are looking at tools to do sales virtually, then it's thinking outside the box. Like every time you have a creative idea of how you can actually reach a prospect, I think is incredible. Like I'm a big believer in voice notes. I'm a big believer in Vidyard, both free tools. But if you really want to think outside, like look up a guy called Stu Heinecke. He pretty much coined the term contact marketing. Last year alone, I ended up trying to BD a guy who ran a fintech. He also like had a lot of shares in like a brewing company. I sent him a compass, which engraved on the back, it said, "Here's a compass for the next time you hike up Mount Washington after 6 beers." And he got on the phone to me immediately. Like that cost me $40, which if you break down the hours in a day that you're actually getting paid to do your sales job and you're not getting any meetings, I can guarantee if you sent 3 of those out a day and got 2 out of 3 meetings for those, I'm pretty sure that your manager is going to be like, "Do you know what? That's actually a great idea." So any time that you can actually think outside the box and look into other mediums, just do it, get the approval and send the expense through. Because honestly, like email marketing is going to continually to get harder. Cold calling is going to be around probably forever, but it'll get harder as well. So any way that you can break through into like have that conversation in a buyer's mind, then it's a good idea.
Yeah. And I think couple that with what Casey said earlier about, we feel like we've got to be so perfect, and as a new person, perfect and professional. Like you got to be yourself. You've got to find ways to differentiate that is unique and genuine to you, and not that like you're reading off a script. I'm a huge fan of scripts, but not sounding like you're reading a script. And that comes with practice, right? You get the message, you internalize the message from the script, and then you utilize different mediums to stand out. Like you mentioned the compass. He also prospected my CEO wearing a Bullhorn Stampede shirt, which is my CEO's band. And guess what? The CEO responded to him like, right away. So it's how do you think of creative ways to stand out amongst the competition? Because your buyers are getting bombarded with sellers, and the majority are bad. And we're getting announcement that we got to jump. So I hope everybody enjoyed this. Please connect with us if you have other conversations. And panelists, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Guys.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.
Cheers, Casey. Cheers, Will.
Bye.